West Michigan. This is Grand Tap Media, Breathe In the Grand Show, produced by Keim Concept. I am your host, Pamela Keim from Grand Tap Media. And the spirit of the show is to introduce you to your neighbors in West Michigan. And boy, do I have a very special neighbor for you to meet. I am so honored to have this guest here today. Many of you may have heard him on the radio or saw him on TV. He's known as Mr. Green Thumb. He has a show on the radio called The Garden Show. He's had for like over 20-some years. And he has written a book you might have read. I Just Wet My Plants, which he just gave me a copy, so I can't wait. But he is here today because he has written another book. And this is a little bit different than what he normally writes, but this is to honor our veterans. It's called Operation Rumination, and it is turning back the clock. So I want to welcome your neighbor, Rick Vuyst, to the show.
Hello, neighbor.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great.
Okay, I am so excited to have you here. I hope that was okay.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, and I'm excited about hearing about this book because I've seen it, I've talked to you, and then my husband, which you both are the same generation. I'm a little bit younger than he is, I'll have to say. But anyways, and he has a heart for the veterans and the history. So we're going to share that a little bit with you. But I want you to start off by talking about what inspired you to do this book, considering that you did this book last time, right?
Right.
And
exactly.
what you would like to accomplish with writing this book.
Well, the first book, Pamela, I Just Wet My Plants, was based on my 25 years of doing live radio. And I developed a fictitious character called Wilma Plants Grow and kind of built the book around that. So it was loads of fun for me. Operation Rumination has surprised people in that the book has absolutely nothing to do about gardening, nothing to do about puns. And Pamela, in answer to your question, I was inspired because I graduated from high school in 1977. So it was right after the Vietnam War, the draft was done, and I was one of these Apollo-age moonshot kids. I was 10 years old when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. Well, I think that people around that age group possess three characteristics, and that is, number one, they had goals. They were driven, just like the Apollo age. Number two, they had a plan, but they kind of made it up as they went.
Right.
And then number three, they didn't have enough time to get it done, just like the Apollo moonshot program. So it's post-Vietnam War, post-draft, and I never entered the military. And it's a regret that I've carried my entire life, and now this year I'm approaching the age of 60. And I'm sitting there thinking, Pamela, that 7.3% of Americans have either served or are serving in the U.S. military. That means 92.7% of people walking around are like me, have never served. And we need to hear those stories because those stories are so important. And that was my motivation behind writing Operation Rumination.
Well, considering you probably knew a lot of veterans, and you said that you kind of regret going in, is it because they share with us, is it because they had a different perspective on life, or they had such experience? And, you know, because my husband has the same regret. He wished he would have went into the military too. But something came up, and he had a different career choice, so he took that. But I noticed that a lot. People kind of wanted that experience. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that what I found within the book, I spent the entire year hanging out with veterans and learned that there are some key characteristics that tie all of them together. And so I took that regret, and what I decided to do was to clear what I call brain fog as you approach the age of 60. I'm very much into running and physical fitness. I believe that it helps us think more clearly, that it's so important. So what I did out where I live on Pier Marquette Beach is I chose a 2-mile stretch of beach to train for the entire year. I would hang out with veterans, hear their story, but in the process I would train on the beach to meet the APFT, which is Army Physical Fitness Test. That's how they test, for example, 17 to 21-year-olds entering the Army. You have to do X number of push-ups, X number of sit-ups, and run 2 miles in a certain time to meet the standards. I thought, well, what a great goal. I'll try to do that at the age of 59.
Okay.
And be tested on my 59th birthday, how I did. But that's a sideshow, a sidelight, because what it did is it really opened up my mind and gave me the opportunity while I trained to think on what I was learning from these wonderful veterans and tie it all together. And that's what I reveal in Operation Rumination.
Wow. Okay, so my husband had kind of an epiphany. This was probably about a year ago. He started doing push-ups too. He just said, you know what? It just, when he was a kid, his dad was a veteran, and he said you needed to you needed to do pull-ups, and you needed to do push-ups. And he had 3 sons. You know, David was one of them, and his dad had a rigorous kind of physical fitness he wanted the kids to keep.
Sure.
So let's talk about the issue that has in our country today. There is a concern, and you know that, that there is a lot of people that are not, at a very young age, very out of shape.
Well,
what are your thoughts?
As a matter of fact, Pamela, during the process of writing this book, and we talk about push-ups, and the Army is really into something here as far as push-ups are concerned, because Harvard University did a study of over 1,000 firefighters over a 10-year period. And they determined that your ability to do 40 push-ups or more gave an indication of your risk of cardiovascular disease and your health and your prospects over the next 10 years. And so you should be able to do 40 push-ups. Now, in the APFT testing that I took, for a 100% score, you would do 72 push-ups in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Something like 70 sit-ups in 2 minutes, and then be able to run 2 miles between 13 and 15 minutes. And so I was tested on that on my 59th birthday. But I am in full agreement that that exercise clears the mind, and yet I feel that the best basic training and the best exercise that you can do is to lift someone up, because it's good for the heart.
Right.
So we physically train, but we also mentally train and clear the mind. And I believe that the thought process works far better when you are physically active, and tried to prove that within Operation Rumination.
And I think there's been research, and I delved into this years ago when I was trying to learn about physical fitness. But they say that exercise is for the brain.
Oh, no
Not
question.
so much for, it's nice to be fit, but actually it clears out your brain, like you just said, that brain fog.
Yeah.
And if you do some running or cardiovascular exercise, that you clearly think better.
Well, oxygen and blood flow, but in addition to that, depression issues. There are many people today who struggle with depression. I had a period of time in my life where I really struggled with it, which is outlined in my first book, I Just Wet My Plants, chapter 13. But aside from that, I can have like a long, difficult day, but if I go out and I run at the end of the day, I feel like a different man. And it doesn't have to be running, it doesn't have to be push-ups or sit-ups, but just move, whether it's yoga, biking, hiking, walking, whatever it is.
Right.
But get some fresh air and walk. As a matter of fact, going back to the first book again, Pamela, if you can do that in a wooded area, the Japanese have a phrase for that. They call it forest bathing. And there is real truth to something called phytoncides that we are able to breathe in when we're out in the woods. These are essential oils that lift our spirits. It's not, as I say in the book, a fig leaf of your imagination.
Right. Okay.
And so you can read about that in your copy of I Just Wet My Plants.
I know. So this is not just about plants. It's about other things. Like I said, when I read the title, I thought, well, how cute. It's
real life stories, not to take ourselves so seriously. And one of the things I've helped people for years on my live radio show to help them with their plants, their hydrangeas, that sort of thing. But the premise of the book and my personal belief is, if you haven't killed any plants, you're not trying hard enough. So go out there and kill some plants. Get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
Try, and we'll get through this.
Well, there is when I was more of a gardener, there was something, I don't know if it was spiritual when you did a good job in your yard, your plants, it all kind of blended together. You couldn't wait. Honestly, the best time my yard looked the best was like in September and October when you were, when you've done the whole, all the preparing.
Sure.
But you always had this goal to get your yard into place by 4th of July.
Right.
And then you get through and you try to make it stay alive until, and then all of a sudden once, Chris, once school starts,
Well, yeah,
different,
and people's enthusiasm tends to wane when the weather gets to be 90 and humid, okay? But fall really is the best time to garden. And one other thing I would mention, Pamela, is it's well noted and well documented that dirt, soil, has natural antidepressant qualities within it. You've got to get your hands in the dirt. You got to take a good sniff, because it will do you a lot of good.
Well, what about the? My husband talked about the Kennedy, President Kennedy's fitness test. Let's get back to that because I really think it is something that our country is going to have to face. And it's honestly, it's not like I feel people are bad. I feel like we've been blessed with abundance. Abundance of food, abundance of good food, right? Yeah. And it's nice to go to restaurants and have a nice meal. But with our kids coming up and growing up, and I feel like they're just kind of sluggish. Do you not?
Well, I think that the thing to bear in mind, and that's what I learned with Operation Rumination also, is that again I was influenced by mid-20th century men and women, adults, who, as I call it, never complained and never explained. But they were also grounded by a Great Depression, World War II, technological advances, a moonshot, riots, you name it, okay? The Vietnam War. And so their perspective, their attitude was one where they really didn't complain and never explained. But those stories need to be told, and one of the characteristics that I found with these individuals, especially the 100-year-old World War II veterans that I hung out with, they were physically active their whole life, whether they were runners or swing dancers or hikers or whatever it is. So I think that there's a real key there. They had a sense of humor, humility, something greater than themselves. And then one of the important lessons that I learned from them, Pamela, is that courage is not the absence of fear. We all experience fear in our lives at some point or another, but courage is not the absence of fear. It's doing what you need to do despite the presence of fear.
Right. It's like public speaking. I'm an advocate for that, right?
Yeah, sure.
And people always ask me, Pamela, are you ever afraid to get up there? And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
I still, I have to deal with my fear. Yeah. And it always depends on your audience. You know that. Sometimes, I got this, and all of a sudden you're in a room with a bunch of, every time, I always tell people when I present in front of the board of the YMCA, I get a little nervous, more nervous. But you understand that. And one of the things I want to tell you that conquered that fear, some of that fear, is watching veterans. Documentaries.
Sure.
Could you just imagine telling these veterans that had gone through World War II and, even one, and say, my biggest fear, Virgil, is public speaking.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Well,
what did he say? He'd go, what?
Well, and what I found from them, Pamela, is that one of the characteristics that's laid out in Operation Rumination is that these individuals had continual goals. You're in the basement of a 100-year-old World War II veteran. He's sitting at a computer working on a travel log. While in the corner are paintings that he's working on. And the work out in the garden is waiting for him. Or 100-year-old Marion Cybersky, who I interviewed in her home. And when we were done with the interview, she was going out back to turn the compost pile, put it in 5-gallon pails, and then share it with her neighbors and her friends. Whatever the goal was, there always were continual goals. And then also the perspective of what they had gone through. Take Hudsonville native Al Johnson, who served in the OSS and could not tell his story for 50 years afterwards. Now he can, and he does it with a sense of humor that rivals Johnny Carson. This guy is so funny, so amazing. But as a young man, he was jumping out of the belly of planes in the dark behind enemy lines in Nazi Germany or in China fighting the Japanese. Talk about just amazing. And so you mentioned Virgil.
Virgil, we're friends with Virgil. Tell who Virgil is.
Virgil Westdale, 101-year-old World War II veteran, an amazing man, an American hero.
Right.
Someone who fought through Europe with honor. and then freed prisoners from the Dachau concentration
I know
camp.
it. That's what he
Okay?
shared with us. Yeah.
And you sit across from someone like Virgil Westdale. I went to McDonald's with Virgil, and we got a cup of coffee. And by the way, we both got the senior discount because they give it to you when you're over 55 years old.
Thanks.
So we both got the senior discount.
So I'll get mine too then, right?
But so you sit across from Virgil, an amazing story which is outlined in Operation Rumination.
Right.
And you say to Virgil, Virgil, how did you accomplish everything you accomplished in your life? It's amazing. And Virgil, like many of the other veterans, would do this to me. They shrug their shoulders and they say, just did what I had to do.
That's exactly what they all say.
And I'm
did
like,
what we had to do.
No. That's not good enough. I need something more, Virgil. And so Virgil is sitting there with his McDonald's coffee.
Okay.
And he sets it down and he bows his head. And then he raises his head. And from memory says to me, and I'm going to try this, Pamela, okay?
Okay.
Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but he, with a chuckle, replied that maybe it couldn't, but he wouldn't be one to say so till he tried. So he buckled right in with a trace of a grin on his face. If he worried he hit it,
right.
He started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. Now, he says that to me from memory, a poem that he learned when he was 8 years old. Pamela, I'm sitting in a McDonald's with my coffee, and I have goosebumps on my arms. I'm like, this amazing man who's done so much in his life, more than I think I could ever hope to do.
Right.
Inspires me.
It
Inspires me.
It does.
And part of the lesson of Operation Rumination is learning selfless service. And these people put their lives on the line to protect the freedoms that we have, that we enjoy today, that I enjoy today. But I'm part of the 92.7% that never served. And so I'm thankful for their service.
Right.
But more importantly, I think their stories need to be told,
right,
so that other people learn from this practice of selfless service. Because, hey, Pamela, I'm passionate about this, okay? I believe that selfless service is not something we inherit. It's not necessarily part of our DNA, but rather selfless service is a discipline that is demonstrated,
right,
shown, expressed, and that we learn from that. People like Virgil, Al Johnson, Bill Hardiman, who lives in Kentwood, Vietnam medic.
Wow.
I mean, I would sit with him at lunch, and it brought tears to my eyes. You know, the experience of Vietnam veterans, they all experienced the same three things. They experienced fear,
okay,
they experienced loneliness, and they experienced the cold shoulder when they came home. And many of them Agent Orange to boot. I'm just...
Are you surprised by that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Well, what do you think is happening to, what do you think about today? People not even, you know, wanting to change or go back in history and, you know, judge them for whatever the situation was back then. I always tell, I just dealt with that with a friend. I go, we're going to be judged. We get, as we get older, and what we saw, what we didn't see, what we did, what we thought, you know what I'm saying? But they did heroic things. They did what they had to do.
Heroic things.
Under conditions. They didn't do the whole world. You know what I'm saying? They didn't want to go into the war, but they had to. And to judge them so harshly, and then you want to not teach it.
Yeah.
So those like
and they are proud of their service. Okay. In the book, Robert Boyer, okay, he invested in a patrol boat river. It's a boat that would operate along the channels and rivers in Vietnam. And he drove down to Chicago, picked up the boat, has restored it, and now takes veterans for rides out on Muskegon Lake, especially those suffering from PTSD.
Yeah.
And so I call these people, Pamela, a heavenly host. Whether they're veterans or not, there are a lot of people out there also who are not veterans, but every day practice selfless service. And they fly under the radar. okay?
Right.
They don't get the fanfare that a football star or a movie star or celebrity gets. They fly under the radar, but what they do is amazing. I call them a heavenly host. Just a simple example, I told you that I trained on the beach, Pier Marquette Beach, to meet the Army's physical fitness requirement.
Okay.
You run on a beach early in the morning on a July day as the sun's coming up. The day previous was a gorgeous day. There are a number of people who visited the beach and left trash out there on the beach. Diapers, beer cans, cigarette butts, you name it, all over the place, okay?
Right.
Not everybody, but some people do. And I think in my mind, what causes them to act selfishly that way? Because as I run the beach, I see a number of people walking the beach with trash bags, Meyer grocery bags, and they're picking up trash. And I stop on my run and I talk to these people and I say, what are you doing out here? Well, we're picking up trash. And why are you doing that? Are you paid by the city, the county, the state? No. Just something I want to do.
Right.
Something as simple as that, or giving someone a smile during the day who needs that smile. Acts of selfless service. And the veterans in the book practice selfless service to the nth degree.
Right.
in how they sacrificed. But there are many ways that we can practice selfless service today in our communities. I call it boots on the ground,
Right.
grassroots level. You have that opportunity. I have that opportunity. Everyone has that opportunity. And I think we got to take advantage of it.
Exactly. Okay, let me ask you, why did you pick certain people to be in this book? You probably interviewed a lot.
That's a great question. And again, my premise, Pamela, is that selfless servants are all around us.
Right.
But they operate without fanfare, okay? And so what I decided to do is I started with the first veteran in the book who was obvious, and that is Virgil Westdale, an American West Michigan hero, 100, I love that man. And his story is amazing.
Yeah.
But then I decided, you know what? I'm just going to take an entire year and be observant. Because these veterans, like Al Johnson in Hudsonville or Bill Hardiman in Kentwood, are in the grocery store with us. They go to church with us.
Right.
They're walking out on the street. They're wherever. And they can pass right by you. And if you didn't know their story, you would not realize what they did or what they went through. And so essentially, Pamela, these people fell into my lap. Why? Because I opened my eyes. And then you ask questions. You ask questions. Or speaking to a family member who has lost someone in the military. I remember sitting with a young man in a bar in Fort Lauderdale. Just struck up but there he was sitting next to me, and we struck up a conversation. Or in the locker room at the YMCA, a young man who had lost his brother in Iraq. And I learned, you know, I'm thinking, okay, what can I do? What could I possibly say?
Right.
And I learned that there are three important things that you have to do. The first one is listen to their story, and I mean listen.
Do they want to share their stories?
Yes.
I figured as much. Yeah.
Listen to the story. Number two, honor their service. And number three, respect your country and your flag.
Right.
And if you do those three things, that is what you can do to respect the service or the sacrifice that was made by an individual or a family member. I think it's so important.
Do you find yourself,
Can you tell I'm passionate about
Yes,
this?
and I love that. And my husband, you would love my husband too. On that, only because he is, you know, grew up in the same generation. His dad was in the military, his uncle was in the military, his son served in the military. And when he shares about, we watch these movies, and he's those people that have, you know, I don't know what, there's some part of history that he likes doing he knows the uniform, the weapons, everything. He can tell when it's wrong. He said that was not, and that gun was not, and you know, even in existence during that war. So it couldn't have been during the war. So he knows that kind of stuff. Or the buttons are on the wrong, or the stripes. You know what I'm saying? He's got those kind of critique and
study the story, study the history. There's a quote in Operation Rumination from Anne Frank, and she essentially says, You really cannot test or know the character of a person until you've had a jolly good row with them.
A jolly good row with them?
A jolly good row, R-O-W, with them. In other words, her point was conversing like this.
Right,
Get to know them.
Right.
Find out. Ask questions. Listen to their story.
So when you listen to their stories of, because we had a clear, like World War One and Two. I mean, I heard some really horrible things when people came back from World War One. That was going on. But what are their opinions on the Iraq War? That's going on almost 20 years now. It feels like it's been to that. I mean, what do they have? Do they feel like I know they're supportive of the veterans and whatever, but what do they think about the mission and what we?
Very supportive of the veterans.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a political book. It is not about politics. I think you set politics aside and you understand that with these veterans, number one, they understand camaraderie. And camaraderie is important to them. And number two, I've been in the business world my whole life. And with these individuals, and what I learned from them is that they have each other's back.
Right.
Sometimes in the business world, you think someone supports you, but they don't have your back. Okay?
You learn that real. Yeah.
It's competition.
Right.
All right. But with these individuals, they had each other's back, thick or thin. They learned that. That's what they did. And you'll sit across the table from veterans like Bill Alverson, who fought in Korea, and some of the people that he fought with. Even today, you can tell the passion, the honor, the interest in supporting and having the back of that individual who fought with them. It's inspiring.
Have you brought, since you've written the book and more people that, have read it, I'm going to be reading it, and I'll give it to my husband to read too, but just how they've, you're right, Rick, we need to do this. We need to, I know you're doing some speeches and on making the circuit on all the media and stuff like that, but they really are like, we've kind of gotten away from these people because they're dying now. This generation is, every time you turn around, how many are losing a day of World War II veterans that are going, and then of course Vietnam is coming up to that critical age too, where they're starting to have issues, right, because of their aging. Mm-hmm. So what are you seeing out there?
I think what we do, and part of my project here in Operation Rumination was to partner with Grand Valley State University.
Yeah, share a little bit of that.
And Dr. James Smither, who does wonderful work there on the Veterans History Project, and it's tied into the Library of Congress. But what they do is they document the stories of these veterans, try and capture them, and retain them for future generations to understand and to learn.